Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. My name is Canton Little and welcome to my channel. And I suppose you might be wondering where I've been for the past few months, and well, it's really been quite a tale. You see, I recently, by recently I mean just a few months ago, graduated with my undergraduate degree in philosophy, and I'm currently doing my master's degree in literature, and I've been just busy trying to find a job and just figuring out what it is I wanted to do. But the more sort of realistic option was I went into a bit of a reading rut. I wasn't really interested in reading too much, and that made it difficult to want to produce content. And it's today's video topic, which is on how to get out of a reading rut. You may notice that my hair has changed a little bit. That's because one of my close friends was diagnosed with leukemia, and we all shaved our heads in solidarity with him when he started losing his hair. So I'll put the GoFundMe for that down below. If you, without further ado, let's get into the video. So reading is something I very much enjoy, and I'm sure it's something that you enjoy if you're watching this video. But there are times when it becomes more difficult to read than other times. I recently experienced that myself. I've found it more difficult in the overly saturated, technologically ensnared world that we live in to find quiet time and peace to read. And part of that stems from just the amount of reading you have to do in college. And I've done a lot of reading during my undergraduate, and I've been doing a lot more reading during my graduate program, and it just makes it more difficult to want to read leisurely or for other reasons other than for schoolwork. And so the reason why I think it's pertinent to find avenues to re-sparkle in that love of reading is because you'll never be alone when you have a good book beside you. As John Adams once said, you'll never be truly alone with a poet in your pocket. So I'm going to really just talk about how to get out of a reading rut. And I'm also going to talk about what my current reads are. Right, the big avenue that helped me kind of get back into reading was reading manga, more specifically reading manga in Japanese. Not only does it help me with my Japanese language acquisition and just reading and input and all that, but you also get to enjoy stories in a unadulterated fashion rather than through translation where certain things can get lost. You get to enjoy the language in its purest form. Might sound a little elitist, but that's not what I'm really saying. So, for example, with Bleach, in Japanese, there's various different ways to say you. You know, you have anata or kimi or time or other more rude ways to say you, like kisama. And so it's interesting to read the dialogue of Ichigo and Chad and Rukia and just seeing how they use the word you. Ichigo usually says time, and Rukia tends to use more older Japanese. It's interesting to see that dynamic. But that was one way I got back into reading, and it's certainly a recommendation I have. Manga, graphic novels, anything like that. That is always a good way to get back into reading because it's not difficult reading per se. You're not really having to go through and just grapple with existential issues like if you're reading Camus or Dostoevsky or Tolstoy. Another recommendation I have is Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. Now, I had never read this before, and I quite liked it. I was surprised at the narrative clarity and the prose. I've read Hemingway before. I've read The Sun Also Rises and A Farewell to Arms, and I've been told that The Old Man and the Sea is his magnum opus, which I can certainly see where people would get that, but I think it's one of his better works, but I wouldn't say it's his best. It's quite short. It's more of a novella than a novel, and it's pretty straight to the point, and so I think that is a fantastic book to recommend to new readers or to people wanting to get into reading. Now, this one may be a bit more kind of controversial in some ways, and I recommend just reading poetry. So I have this really nice Everyman Pocket Poets of Emily Dickinson's poems. I believe Harold Bloom referred to Dickinson as the American Sublime, or maybe I'm mistaken on that part. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I absolutely love the Everyman Pocket Poets. I always carry one on me. I love poetry. It's just a great pastime with literature, and it's not as intensive as literature, but it's far more interpretive. And then now I have Walt Whitman as well. Walt Whitman's a very approachable American poet. I'm sure some of you have heard of "Oh Captain, My Captain," either from the poem reading it in school or from the famous movie The Dead Poet Society with Robin Williams. That was an incredible movie. I highly recommend that you watch it because when people question the value of the humanities, just show them to that movie and they'll understand. Now, some other books I would recommend for getting back into reading would be Harold Bloom's How to Read and Why. This is one of his easier works to read, but it certainly shows a more instructive way of reading. If you're interested, I might make a video on this if there's enough interest in the comments below, or people just want to kind of get better at have a better approach at reading, because I've done a video on Mortimer Adler's How to Read, and that was a fantastic. Another one I would recommend, if you're in for more of a challenge, you want to read something more on the long term, would be Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Now, this is the Oxford World Classics edition, which is translated by Rosamund Bartlett. I absolutely enjoyed Bartlett's translation. It makes Anna Karenina feel more like a English novel rather than a Russian novel, but you can catch some of the Russian aspects of it within the translation. Bartlett does a phenomenal job. I'm a bit more partial towards the Maud translation, which you can find in the Everyman library. I'm sure you can find other copies of that. Pavir and Volokhonsky do the Penguin edition, so there's that. And if you want to go old school, there's always Constance Garnett. Those are really the big prominent translations. But Anna Karenina is a approachable, very approachable story, and it's one of Tolstoy's best work, and certainly one that I thoroughly enjoyed. Next, I would recommend maybe a mystery. So like Sherlock Holmes. This is the Everyman Sherlock Holmes. Beautiful navy cloth bound. Whenever I was in middle school was the first time I really started getting back into the classics, because I grew up with my mom always talking about Jane Austen and Herman Melville and these other literary icons, and we're just like, oh yeah, that's cool. But when I read A Study in Scarlet by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the first book in the Sherlock Holmes series, I was utterly astounded, and I made a vow at that point to read the classics and to go to the Sherlock Holmes Museum in London, which I did accomplish last year, and I know that 6th grade me would be immensely overjoyed by that. And finally, I would recommend a Dickens book, A Tale of Two Cities. It is probably the best plot that Dickens has in his oeuvre. I haven't read all of Dickens. I've read Tale of Two Cities, Mystery of Edwin Drood, and I'm currently working through the Pickwick Papers, which I'll get to that very shortly. Tale of Two Cities takes place during the French Revolution. The prose is gorgeous, and it has arguably the most iconic opening line. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And it also has one of the best ending lines that I've ever read in literature, but I won't be spoiling that right here. I recommend those. If you want to, you can also go with Jane Austen. She's quite approachable, or Haruki Murakami. Other things I'd recommend would be finding reading lists online. It can be on different websites, it can be on Reddit, it can be university recommended readings. I simply just recommend finding something approachable, something interesting to you. It could be a selection of short stories, because reading doesn't have to be this dull, intensive sort of practice, because reading is for leisure and it's for fun. There are certain books where it's going to be more intensive, like if you're reading Kant or Hegel or Heidegger, you're going to grapple with them a lot more than if you're reading, let's say, Charles Dickens or a light novel. Reading has different levels of intensity, and there's different levels to reading, analytical and synoptical reading and such. But also, it's just important to remember that remember why it is you like to read and why you want to read, because reading is a lifestyle and it's an art form. Other than that, let's talk about what I'm recently reading. I've started reading William Faulkner's Light in August. That has been an interesting read so far. I haven't really ever read Faulkner, never read him much in university or in high school, and so this is kind of my first really taste test of Faulkner's work. And I must say, he certainly exhibits modernism in his writing, and I can see the Southern Gothic writing style, the prose that people tend to rave on about in Faulkner, and I'm slowly gaining an appreciation of his work, and I hope that I read more of his work in the near future. Along the same lines of Southern Gothic is Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon. We're reading this in the Hardcore Literature Book Club that is run by Benjamin McAvoy. So Ben, if you're watching this, hi. I've never really read much of Toni Morrison either, which is a bit surprising, but I've never read any of her novels. And so I'm excited to take a deep dive into this and see what she means about her muse. I've read the prologue, and I'm excited to go further into this book. Next, I have what I mentioned before, the Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens, and this is the Oxford World Classics. You can find Dickens in pretty much any fashion. You can find him Everyman. You can find him in Oxford, Penguin, I think Signet, Wordsworth, Easton Press, or Franklin Press. And if you have the money, you can also find like first editions. Pickwick Papers, pretty humorous so far. I can definitely see that Dickens' genius is illuminated throughout this work, and I'm very excited to finish it. And finally, I have been reading or rereading Thus Spoke Zarathustra by Nietzsche, also in the Hardcore Literature Book Club with Ben. Ben is a phenomenal booktuber. He inspired me to really start this channel and talk about my own passions with reading. And I noticed that BookTube has been going through a lot of changes. A lot of people have been leaving. People have been starting new things. I just want to come out here and say that I'm back. I was in a rut for a while, and it's okay to be honest with yourself about those things, because you don't always have to continuously push yourself to produce content or produce work that you are not fully passionate about, because that just leads to poor quality. And I'm all for putting more quality and work into what it is I do, rather than just doing it for the sake of having to do it. But it's also just a hobby for me. This is a hobby. It's not like it's my main form of making money. It'd be cool if it was, but and maybe that's just a ridiculous approach to this sort of work, because YouTube, I remember when YouTube was more of a hobby kind of thing. People didn't really get paid by it. They just showed what they liked and they did that. And I kind of have that same approach, and I know a couple of my friends who do YouTube have that same approach. So I just wanted to apologize for kind of being out, and I should have been a bit more engaged with my community. I also want to say thank you for the 200 subscribers. That is crazy. I never thought that 200 people would even be interested in things I talk about. I quite frankly don't necessarily find myself to be the most interesting person. All I ever talk about is books or philosophy or languages and things like that. But it's good to know that there are people interested in what I do, what I produce, what I talk about. And so for that, I thank you. If you want to see other videos similar to this, be sure to check out my video on analytical reading, how to read. It'll be right here. All right. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please subscribe if you liked. Leave a comment down below if you want to see if there's any books you recommend me to review or read, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.